He said that several times. He even said it to a minister once who gave a sermon on civil rights afterwards. I mean, can you imagine giving a sermon and the president says you can't legislate morality? No, he again, this goes back to his very limited view of what government could do. There were certain things that he thought government could do about civil rights, and he was willing to do them. The military was one. D.C. was another. Appointing judges was one. But Eisenhower had a very, I think, healthy skepticism about how long it would take to change people's minds. And by the way, Dr. King did as well. I mean, Dr. King thought that it would take decades before you had white people and black people seeing each other in really colorblind ways. And Eisenhower would have largely agreed with that. He didn't think that a law or even a presidential speech could really change the way people fundamentally deal with each other. He thought that would come over time. He thought that things like the Civil Rights Commission could help facilitate a dialogue. He thought that, again, the military being an example, Washington, D.C. being a showpiece to the nation that desegregation can work, and other southern cities should try this. It's working pretty well here in the capital. You might try it in your town. Those were steps he was comfortable with. But the idea that he could issue a proclamation, as Dr. King wanted him to do repeatedly, Eisenhower didn't see any value to that. He didn't think that would change anyone's minds, and in fact it might enrage white people in the South. And so he, for better or for worse, had a very quiet voice publicly on this topic, which is part of why he's never gotten any credit. Please.
Well, since you worked in the Bush White House early on, besides the chief of staff and structure there, did you see direct influences as you were researching this book between Eisenhower as a leader, as a man, his style of leadership, and the Bush presidency?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I get asked that a lot. I guess the thing that I always try to reflect on with Eisenhower is his very methodical approach, his ability, particularly at Little Rock, of really working his way through a problem until he ended up at an option of last resort. And yet he didn't hesitate to do it. And in fact, I'll tell you, when I was researching the book, I was in Kansas, and this was when Katrina was going on. And I remember reading in the paper, there was a lot of criticism about why didn't the president send in federal troops to New Orleans. And I remember, and I knew the reason. I mean, the reason is no president wants to do it. It's a very bad option. But I remember reading in the paper some pundits saying, essentially defending it and saying, can you imagine, a president doing that? And I thought, well, yeah, I'm writing a book about one who did it. Which is not to say it's an easy decision. It's a horrible decision, but sometimes it's the only decision. And Eisenhower, because he was so methodical, I think had worked his way through every other option to the point that once he got to the military option, he never looked back. I mean, there was nothing left for him to do but send troops in there and settle the issue, and that's what he did. And so, do I think that I'll put it this way. I don't know that many presidents are as methodical as Eisenhower was. And I think that that's a good role model and a good case study for all presidents, that there's a very serious way to hear both sides of the issue, to go through all the options, to research every angle of the issue, and then once you make a decision, go forward with it. And I think it's very instructive to us even today.
You described your thought that the president appointed appellate and district court judges with some understanding of perhaps how they might act in this arena. Did you find any evidence of a similar calculus with regard to his appointment to the High Court? And additionally, is there any comment by members of the High Court about Eisenhower in this issue?
Well, I mean, there's Earl Warren, which we could spend several hours discussing. I mean, I hesitate to mention this, and I left it out of the speech. Warren is another reason why Eisenhower's never got credit on civil rights. I mean, Warren essentially waged a campaign to rid Eisenhower of any credit on civil rights. He was so enraged at what he saw Eisenhower's disengagement from the issue, and in particular the Brown ruling. Warren believed that Eisenhower should have come out and announced that this is a great ruling and this is a great day for the country, and everybody ought to rise up and welcome this new and integrated society in the South. Again, that's exactly what Eisenhower didn't want to do. He was trying to calm people down, not rile them up. They were already riled up enough in the South. And so Warren, I think, misinterpreted Eisenhower's silence as essentially disagreeing with the decision. Well, in fact, as I document in the book, Eisenhower, with the help of Herbert Brownell, had filed a brief in the case on the side of the NAACP. So it's factually incorrect for Warren to say that Eisenhower was against the ruling when he had filed a brief asking for that very ruling. But was he silent once the ruling came down? He was pretty quiet. I mean, what he said in his public press conference is, the Supreme Court has made its decision, and I intend to enforce it. And Eisenhower's rule on those was that he didn't get into the habit of commenting on specific decisions, that he just let the Supreme Court do their job and then he enforced the law. So the Eisenhower-Warren relationship got just poisonous at that point and never recovered. And Warren in his memoirs just savages Eisenhower as being totally insensitive on the issue. Now, on the other hand, there's been a lot made about the other point you raised, which is, did Eisenhower know who he was appointing to the court and what they would do? Brownell says in his oral histories that when they talked about Warren, Eisenhower was broadly aware of Warren's rulings on civil rights as a governor, his policies in California. Well, what were his policies in California? Well, he supported essentially sort of an equal employment commission at the state level. And back then, that was a huge issue in national politics because a lot of people on the left wanted a national commission. And Eisenhower in '52 had explicitly endorsed state versions, not a national version. So Eisenhower was very comfortable with Warren's record on civil rights as a governor. In fact, had Eisenhower been a governor, he would have had a very similar record, I argue. But that's not to say Eisenhower appreciated that once Warren turned in the governor's office for the Supreme Court, that he would then be as much of an advocate for national involvement in civil rights as he was. Now, this gets very murky here because, again, Eisenhower is essentially on the right side of this issue, and he files a brief in the case. But I do think, and one of the oral histories from another aide said that the size and scope of the ruling, I think, really stunned Eisenhower. Not that he disagreed with it, but just the logistics of it. Every school district in America, we're going to desegregate, overnight, essentially. And I think that just sort of stunned him. So I don't think that he ever realized when he appointed Warren what was going to happen. Once it happened, he didn't disagree with it. I found no evidence that he disagreed with it. But I think he worried about the implications and the implementation of it. And frankly, I mean, he's the guy, not Warren, that had to worry about those issues. And we saw that at Little Rock. So it's a fascinating piece of the story. I deal with it at length in the book. But there was a lot of bad blood between Warren and Eisenhower. And a lot of the mythology about Eisenhower not caring about civil rights comes from Warren.